Hey guys, Mr. Kim here. So today's lesson is a very important writing lesson. It covers a very useful technique for brainstorming, for structuring your arguments, and it also covers a very useful technique for what to do with how to order what you're talking about in an essay. Now, please bear with me because I am honestly trying this format of lesson for the first time in terms of including a video explanation on the slides as I go through the slides with you. I don't know what bugs I have to work out or what issues we have to discover as we go, so please be patient. Thank you. Okay, so on the slide I have do now, but obviously we can't do a real do now. So I'm just going to dictate this to you and just sort of guide you through what I'm trying to get you towards. So consider the following question for a second. Have you ever argued with someone and then realized as you're arguing with them, you don't really know why you disagree with them, but the more you argue, you're like, oh man, I just really don't agree with what they're saying. I just really don't want to listen to what they're saying. It could be like because of their personality. It could just be how they're saying something. Like you might realize, like, oh, you know what, that's a good point, but you're just being so unbearable delivering this point that I don't want to agree with you, or just something else. Now, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of you have some experience on this, if only just because it's arguing with someone. Let's face it, we've all argued with someone before. Um, on my level, or from my personal experience, I've had a lot of arguments with my parents in the past, and more or less when I was a kid. And I realized, like, as I would argue with them, like stuff about, like, like curfew or studying for the SAT or that kind of stuff, I'd realize, oh, you know what, I kind of agree with you as we keep going and going and going, but I get so sick of how they're saying it, or other things they've said on top of that, like really good point I'll notice, that I'd just be like, you know what, I don't know why I disagree with you. I just want to keep disagreeing with you. Now, that might seem like an odd segue into today's lesson, but it is actually really important. So, if you're ready, keep going to the next slide. Okay, so similar to the do now, objective argumentation, which is the first focal point of today's lesson, deals with the concept of disagreeing with something. But rather than disagreeing with it and just constantly, and blindly pushing on through, objective argumentation deals with the concept of disagreeing with something, but then honing in on why you disagree with it and being able to defend and argue for something, even though you maybe don't agree with it or you maybe don't like it personally. It is a very effective brainstorming tool, and I'm going to demonstrate this in a second. But the concept basically boils down to can we separate our emotions from our more factual and argumentative styles of writing? Okay, so to demonstrate the concept of objective argumentation, I thought it would really help to look at our current situation of social distancing. Now, let's be honest, I don't think a lot of us really like social distancing. Sure, we might like that we can sleep in a little more Monday through Fridays for school hours. We might like that we can work at home a little bit. I certainly like being able to, relatively speaking, dress down and be a little more casual and get more sleep. But there are definitely things we don't like about social distancing. I dislike that I can't go to the gym anymore because the gym is shut down. I dislike that I can't go to the mall or restaurants and eat in at a restaurant anymore, or go to a movie theater. And I'm sure a lot of you might be feeling the same way, especially when we're considering things like sports or things like activities from school that you might miss. And I'm sure a lot of you are feeling very anxious about it, and I'm really sorry about how you guys are feeling about that situation. But in terms of talking about it, do we really like social distancing? I'm probably going to say no, at least in my angle. But even though I dislike social distancing, even though I don't emotionally, I don't connect to it on a personal level, I can understand why social distancing is important. I can understand, and objectively speaking, without my emotions, just from a objective standpoint, I can say, you know what? Social distancing is very important for society. And I understand from a personal investment, it's not really for my safety. Because frankly, I'm a young man who can probably uh, weather through any health issues I might get if I contracted the coronavirus. But on the flip side, it's not really for me; it's for other people. So while personally I don't have an investment in terms of my own safety, at least on a serious level, I can objectively say it's important for us to do. Even though I don't like it, it is very, very important. In a nutshell, that's more or less how objective argumentation works. Now, in terms of how it contrasts and transfers into a writing aspect, hit the next slide. Okay, so continuing with objective argumentation and how it factors into essay writing, there are two big ways it works. Let's talk about the first part of the quickie for a second. So one of the biggest problems I get from students is when they come to me when we're writing an essay and they say, Mr. Kim, I know what I want to say in my head, but I don't know how to phrase it. And, that can be really, really tough, especially when you're just trying to figure out what to write in an essay. Now, objective argumentation is really, really useful in this sense because as much as we agree with something, it's really frustrating when we think something or we have an idea or an opinion, but we can't express why we have that idea or opinion. But more than that, sometimes it's even better to look at why we disagree with something. Because if we disagree with something, there are usually reasons why we disagree with it. Very rarely will you get a situation where you disagree with something that you just disagree with so much that you can't understand why you disagree with it, and at the same time can't express why you agree with it. I'll give you an example. Let's say someone came up to me and said, caffeine is really, really, I almost said useful. Caffeine is not useful at all. Now, just to be clear, I don't really like caffeine. I think it's really bad for you. I frankly use and ingest caffeine way, way too much. I'm not joking when I say that during college I consumed, and I actually sat down to do the math at one point. I consumed about 130 to 40 energy drinks throughout 4 to 5 years. I'm not kidding. That actually happened. I think it's really, really bad for you. Now, can I say that I think it is not useful? Absolutely not. I think it's incredibly useful. Now, I might have trouble trying to figure out how I could say, it's useful, because maybe we've just been using it for so long that I just forget, or maybe I'm just too attached to the issue. But if someone says, it's not useful, it doesn't really help, then I might look at that and say, you know what, no, it does really help. I disagree that it doesn't help because I know from personal experience. I have done a lot of assignments and essays and projects at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning while drinking caffeine because it keeps me awake. Now, just to be clear, you have to be very focused on the specific nature of whatever you're talking about. So, am I saying it's good for you? No. Am I saying it's useful? Absolutely. Now, that's the easier and frankly more straightforward application of objective argumentation. The slightly more obscure, but in my opinion, a little more useful application is when you use objective argumentation to flip sides for planning what you want to write in an essay, or planning what you want to argue for. So, I'll give you an even easier example. Let's talk about, whether you prefer cats versus dogs. Some of you guys might like them the same way, but for the purpose of this example, let's just say that you like cats or dogs better than the other. Now, I myself, I'm more of a dog person than a cat person. So let's say, I talk about reasons that maybe I don't want to buy a cat as much as I want to buy a dog. Maybe I could say something along the lines of, they're not as friendly as dogs. They don't want to hang out with you as much. Maybe I could say something along the lines of, cats, they won't like do things like bring me the paper. I honestly don't know if dogs actually do that or not. I'm just assuming. But let's say I take that reason, that stance of cats aren't as social with you as dogs are. They don't want to, they're not like always, like showering with you affection and love and attention. And again, I'm just saying hypothetically because I don't actually own cats or dogs. Now, I could take that example, that reason, that argument of, cats aren't as social, and I could flip it around and say, you know what if someone actually likes the fact that cats aren't as social as dogs? Maybe a flip side of an argument for that could be you don't have to worry about cats as much. They're more independent than dogs. They don't need as much attention as dogs do. And again, this is hypothetical. Maybe cats do actually. I wouldn't know. I haven't ever owned a cat. But the point is, when you take something you disagree with and you apply objective argumentation, what I'm saying here is if you intentionally say, you know what, I disagree with this, but there probably is a good argument on the flip side, and I'm going to use that to structure my argument. Sometimes that makes for a better essay than writing for something that you actually agree with. Because again, like I mentioned before, sometimes it's really hard to hone in on why you agree with something. Sometimes the reasons kind of like start to merge together. They don't make as much sense if you look at them individually. But we know why we disagree with something. We're pretty clear on it. So if we take something that we disagree with, it's easier to outline more reasons and flesh and hone in on them to an even stronger level. That is a strong way to both plan out an essay and argue for something in an essay. Okay, so in the interest of giving you guys a variety of examples to really understand objective argumentation, I thought we could talk about the topic of technology, which is pretty fitting considering this lesson is literally being given to you through virtual instruction techniques. So, to give you some idea of this, let's go with the question, are we dependent, or rather too dependent, on technology? So if we boil it down, there are really two stances. The affirmative being, yes, we are too dependent, and the negative being, no, we're not too dependent. So personally, I would think that, no, we're not too dependent. I think we use it the right amount, and I think it's really necessary. But using objective argumentation, we can literally come up with reasons that someone else would say and point out to say, no, we are too dependent. Now, again, we don't necessarily have to agree with them. In fact, it's even better if we don't agree with the reverse arguments, points of rationale, because it gives us areas to talk about, to flesh out on in an essay. So if I take the stance of, no, we're not too dependent, someone could say, well, our entire society is structured around technology to the point where if we lost technology, we wouldn't know what to do. So, for example, let's look at this situation right now that we're in. We are fortunate enough to be able to use virtual instruction as a method to help count days towards our required days of instruction that we need for the year. Because if we didn't have the 180 days, we would have to make this up in the summer. And I'm sure many of you are super eager to make up classes in the summer because of our current situation. For the record, I'm speaking hypothetically, we're not necessarily going to have to do that. But again, even though I disagree with that stance, because I could come back and say something along the lines of, well, yeah, but isn't it better that we have this experience so we know what to do? I still came up with a reason that I could probably talk about for a while, because by flipping the stance, by objectively talking about the reverse argument, I could probably talk about it for like a good 5 or 10 minutes if I really, really wanted to. Now, I'm not going to do that for your sake and my sake, because I'd be talking about it for way, way too long, and I don't think you guys want to listen to me talk about that for 30 minutes or something. I do think that this is a good example of how objective argumentation works. Now, if you're a little confused by how this works, please reach out to me. I will clarify. Hopefully the rest of the lesson will also make this pretty clear to you. But just to be demonstrative, this is an effective brainstorming technique. Okay, now, I know this next one is dicey. Please bear with me. I'm really using this question since it relates very heavily to The Great Gatsby. But first, let's take it in its merits. Do you think it is ever okay to cheat on someone in a relationship? I'm sure many of you would say, no, it's not okay to cheat on someone in a relationship. And I'm sure you would have a very good set of reasons to talk about. But as much as I think that it's not okay to cheat on someone in a relationship, I do know a lot of people, frankly, a surprising number of people, who say, yeah, it is okay to cheat on someone in a relationship. Now, I don't agree with them, but if we apply objective argumentation, I could probably think and say, maybe it's an escape from a really bad relationship. Now, let's take this in the context of The Great Gatsby, because yes, it's a story about the Roaring Twenties and indulgence and reality and illusion. But at its core, the base plot is about people who are cheating on each other. We have Tom cheating on Daisy with Myrtle. We have Daisy cheating on Tom with Gatsby. We have, those are really the two big ones right there. Now, a lot of people like Tom and, not Tom, Gatsby and Daisy together. They're literally the focal couple of this entire book. The book is called The Great Gatsby. All right, it's a very popular stance among people who read this book to say, I wish Daisy and Gatsby got together, especially if you've seen the movie, because the movie tries to present them in a super romantic, ideal setting. To the point where we can almost look at their relationship, which is riddled with infidelity, and say, you know what, it is okay for them to have this relationship. I mean, after all, Tom's already cheating on Daisy with Myrtle, so her relationship's not super great, and Tom is definitely kind of a jerk, and maybe he's even violent towards Daisy. I mean, we saw what he did to Myrtle. So as much as, again, I don't specifically agree with this, by considering it from the other stance, by objectively looking at the other argument, the other side, I can come up with a lot of reasons that help me, one, outline my own stuff better, and two, outline the reverse stuff better. Because again, even though I don't like the argument that it is okay to cheat on someone in a relationship, I could argue for it very strongly based on something like The Great Gatsby, or heck, based on someone else's experiences. Because I've never been in a relationship where I felt like it's okay to cheat on someone, but I know people who have, and even though I don't agree with them, they can talk about it very passionately for a long time. And I think there's something to learn there from that. Okay, so the last extension of objective argumentation I want to cover here is a technique for a certain and specific paragraph you can use in your essay. This is something that I have used to great effect many times in college. I really recommend you guys apply this too, because it's a very effective technique. So, again, it boils down to the question of, is it easier to argue for something that you agree with, or is it easier to argue for something that you don't agree with? Because again, even if you don't agree with something, sometimes knowing why you disagree with something can help you argue for it even better, from an objective, non-emotionally attached standpoint. But let's say I want to argue for something that I agree with. Now, one very effective technique you can use is right after your introduction paragraph, right after your thesis statement, because again, your thesis statement is the last part of your introduction paragraph. One thing that is very effective to do is spend a paragraph right after your intro saying, now, we might want to consider this counter argument or this reverse stance. Before we keep going on, it's a good idea to talk about, why this argument that comes up against my argument isn't actually a very good argument. So this is really hypothetical. I'll give you an example. In your essay, I'm going to ask you to tell me, from your opinion, who is the most at fault for what happened to Gatsby in The Great Gatsby. Is Daisy most at fault? Is Tom most at fault? Is George most at fault? Is Myrtle? Is Nick? Etc. 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 Is Gatsby himself at fault? So, let's say I wanted to say it is Daisy's fault, or she is the one who is most at fault for what happened to Gatsby. Now, I could spend the next paragraph right after my thesis statement saying, before we continue, it might be helpful to look at why other characters do not share as much fault as Daisy does. So I could present maybe a really good example. I could talk about Tom, who kind of escalated the whole thing. Or I could talk about George, who literally killed Gatsby. He was the one who physically did the thing. I could talk about how you could argue that either one of them could be really good arguments for why one of them is more at fault than Daisy. And then I could say, but now that I've shown you this, I'm going to tear those things down and show you even stronger reasons why Daisy is most at fault for what happened to Gatsby. By doing this in a paragraph, sometimes it can be two, but let's focus on one. It's usually a longer, stronger paragraph. I both demonstrate that I can be persuasive, I can be effective, and as a writer, I can be conceptually open to considering other perspectives, but at the same time, I'm focused enough and I'm strong enough to make my argument more credible by using other arguments. It's a very effective writing technique. Again, I really recommend you use it. It's not mandatory, but many of my college papers that I did well on, again, in college, use this technique. It's usually best served right after introduction paragraph, but sometimes depending on how you structure your essay, it can be used a little later. Okay, so in preparation for your essay, since I basically told you what it's about, and to really get you thinking about this stuff, I want you to answer this exit ticket on Google Classroom. I will make this available at the same time I release the lesson, and this will be due Tuesday midnight, which should be tomorrow, if you're watching this on Monday. So the exit ticket is two-pronged. First, I'm asking you to tell me, in your opinion, who is the most frustrating character in The Great Gatsby? Maybe it's Daisy. A lot of people have trouble with how she chose Gatsby over Tom. Maybe it's Nick, because, you know, as the narrator, you know, he has a lot of influence. We're looking at this through his perspective, but at the same time, he isn't doing anything. He isn't interfering all that much. Maybe he should have done more. Maybe it's Tom, because frankly, Tom is a terrible, terrible person, and he shouldn't have done all the things he does, etc., etc., etc. Now, once you tell me who is the most frustrating character in your opinion, I want you to tell me why someone else who maybe likes that character more than you, who doesn't find them as frustrating, might say things to really like that character. So, for example, and I'm going to use the one I have here in the X-Ticket slide, let's say I don't like Gatsby. I don't like him because I think he's kind of delusional. I think he's dangerous. Now, someone could flip that and say, you know what, no, I don't agree that he's delusional. I would say that instead of being delusional, because delusional implies that he's like crazy and like really out of sorts, he's just hopeful. Maybe he's a little overly hopeful, but he's hopeful. And he's not dangerous, because dangerous implies that he's causing harm to the people. He's not dangerous. He's just really ambitious. He has really strong, high goals that if they, you know, if he reaches them, they're amazing. They're awesome. I wouldn't call them dangerous. So again, your eggs ticket is two-pronged. Make sure you answer it in Google Classroom in the classwork section. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.